Welcome, everybody. My name is Michelle Castillo. I'm one of the original members of Bayanihan Desert. We're so excited to host this panel on Filipinx artists and activism since the 1990s. Before we begin, we would like to start with land acknowledgements. Bayanihan Desert is calling from the land of the Kauai peoples, known as Sekhe, boiling water. Again, we would like to acknowledge the indigenous land that we are calling from, Sekhe, boiling water. And maybe some folks, I know some of our panelists are in the LA area, the land of the Tongva peoples. So right now, also, as we think this is Filipino American History Month, this is Larry Itlong Day, and also this kind of uh, situation that we are in globally with our community being disproportionately affected by COVID-19. Um, we would like to have a moment of silence for um, the lives that have been lost to COVID-19 and also have a moment of silence for to stand in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement and the lives that have been lost to police brutality. So at this time, we'll be taking 1 minute of silence um, for COVID-19 and to also stand in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. So let's please have that 1 minute of silence.
These 20 million Americans, and many of whom are depending on this legislation because of pre-existing conditions. Many young people, some of whom are online, millions are online voting now because they will never be covered.
Thank you for observing that moment of silence with us. Before we begin, I would like to pass the mic to Jenna Liza Ramoran, as she will share a little bit about who we are by Nihon Desert. Yeah. Manang?
Hello, everybody. My name is Jenny Liza Ramaran. I'm part of Bayanihan Desert, and thank you so much for joining us today. Bayanihan Desert was established to bring Filipinos together and connect with communities of color through public programs and civil engagement.
Thank you, Manang Jenny. So I would like to introduce your moderator for today, Kuya Edwin. Kuya Edwin Ramoran. He will be moderating the panel this afternoon. It looks like he stepped away for a second, but he will be back soon. So again, oh, there he is. So yes, passing the mic on to Kuya Edwin, who will be Edwin Ramoran will be your moderator for this afternoon. Edwin has been one of the original members and founders of Bayanihan Desert. And he's also the human rights commissioner for the city of Palm Springs. Edwin Ramoran. Oh, unmute yourself. Oh.
Hey! we're doing double duty here. Jenny's and actually, Jenny, my niece, who was just on, is in the other room. And thank you, Ading Michelle, so much. And I'm so glad to have our Bainihan Desert family here. We've got folks from the East Coast and West Coast in the middle on this call, which is really exciting. Um, and just a reminder, we are recording. We ask you to, if you want to do quick intros in the chat, please feel free to do that, and feel free to also put in questions when we do get into the Q&A part of it. But we came together, and this is actually being co-hosted by Tres Marix, and Tres Marix will be introduced later by one of the panelists, and actually there are two members of Tres Marix as part of this panel today. But we took on this pretty big subject. And I'm sure when I approached Irene, Tala, Mateo, and Napoleon Lustre about the topic, it's a big topic. And I know that a lot of folks who are familiar with art and activism in Los Angeles and in the United States, especially in regards to the Filipino and Filipinx and Filipino American, the Pinoy cultural community, it's a big subject. So, and it has the a prepositional clause of since the 1990s to in Los Angeles. So we've got a very, very big topic to deal with today. But at the same time, I want you to know that this is a small group today, and we've had a number of virtual town halls as by Nihan Desert. We were founded recently. As we helped in both the civic engagement and cultural engagement and community engagement of Filipinos and Filipinx communities here in the desert in the Coachella Valley. And in particular, we helped shape the first majority minority district one in Palm Springs. And I'm so proud about that part because it includes a neighborhood that I live in and I was born and raised in. And that is the neighborhood of Veterans Tract here in Palm Springs. It's in the eastern part of Palm Springs. Just on the border with Cathedral City, which also has one of the largest Filipino communities in the Coachella Valley. So I'm here in the capacity of an organizer with Bayanihan Desert, of course, as family too, for some of you, but both blood family, as well as married family, as well as queer family. I'm very happy about all those kind of families. So I'm so excited about this because I also serve as one of the commissioners on the Human Rights Commission in Palm Springs. And I'm proud to help proclaim today as October 25th is Larry Itliong Day. And we also have the proclamation from the city of Palm Springs that October is Filipino American History Month. And of course, the proclamation is long, and I'm gonna read it because it has a level of it being a real one. It's a proclamation declaring Filipino American History Month in October in Palm Springs, but it's an extension of that municipal charge, but also that it's a proclamation for Larry Itliong Day, and in very much in real respect and love and in awe of our Manong, being descendants of Manongs, and the history of labor and the farm workers union here in California and in the United States. There's a huge amount of that, and the reality is we have Filipino American History Month, but you know what? Every day is Filipino American History Month. Word. So, and if anything is, every day is Larry Itliong Day, every day is Dolores Huerta Day, every day is Gabriela Silang Day. So come on. You know where it goes. But I'm gonna read it because when I see this proclamation, when I read it as a declaration, I read it as a prayer. It's a prayer. It's a call to action. I'm a proponent of these things because one, they are symbolic, but they actually are built by real history, and that's the history of our ancestors and of those who came before us. So this is where this is a call to action. We should. We know a lot of the Filipino towns in California and in the United States have done this already. They've done the municipal proclamations. They've done the statewide proclamations. But you know what? If you're in a town or a city, or you come from a town or city that doesn't have that proclamation on paper, officially, get it going. And this is actually a template. So use it, copy and paste, and go for it. But, make it specific to where you are locally and make it real, and genuine. So I'm going to share a screen. And the proclamation is actually this thing right here. Actually, this is the physical thing. And today was really a wonderful day because Council Member Grace Elena Garner, who's the first Mexican American Latina city council member, came and delivered it to my mom Clemencia Ramoran. And I have to acknowledge that I am the son of Sosimo and Clemencia Ramoran, and I am also the grandson of Aquilino Ramoran and Pilar Ramoran, and the grandson of Petra Tangonan and Mariano Pimentel. Acknowledging who we come from is an acknowledgement of our ancestors, and I have to be straight up too, like Lolo Aquilino was part of that first generation of Manongs, and a lot of us come from this the migration, and I talk about it this way. We all talk about it this way. Our peoples have been migrating for a while, and we had a very specific situation when as a colony from as a one Spanish colony, but of course from being a U.S. colony from 1898 to 1946, and of course to be straight up being a new colony now. So here we go. The proclamation, City of Palm Springs, California. Whereas Filipino American National Historical Society first declared and observed Filipino American History Month in October 1992 to commemorate the first recorded presence of Luzonos Indios in a Spanish galleon that came ashore on what is now Morro Bay, California on October 18th, 1587. And whereas in California, Filipino American History Month was first recognized in 2006 by the California Department of Education and recognized in 2009 by the state of California, the 103rd United States Congress in 2009 passed the resolution HRAS 780, officially recognizing October as Filipino American History Month. And whereas Governor Gavin Newsom in 2019 issued the proclamation declaring October 25th as Larry Itliong Day in the state of California. And whereas Larry Itliong was born on October 25th, 1913, born in San Nicolas, Pangasinan, Filipinas, later emerging as a leader in the Filipino American community of Manongs, our respected brothers and elders who helped shape the farm labor movement and served in the U.S. military during World War II. And whereas Larry Itliong, Philip Veracruz, Benjamin Hines, Pete Velasco, and the Manong leadership of the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee in the spring of 1965 fought alongside great workers in the Coachella Valley for increased pay and won. And whereas Filipinos with Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, and the National Farm Workers Association worked together on this in September 1965 on the Delana grape strike and the nationwide boycott of grapes that lasted 5 years and led to the first farm worker union contracts. And the joining of these labor organizations formed the United Farm Workers. And whereas Filipino Americans are the second largest Asian American group in the United States and the third largest ethnic group in California, and the Coachella Valley is home to a large Filipino population representing the largest Asian American and Pacific Islander community in the desert. And whereas the Palm Springs neighborhood of Veterans Tract is home to a Filipino enclave formed by Manongs, Filipino World War II veterans of the U.S. military, their families and descendants, in addition to the influx of Filipinos following the U.S. Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. You all know that one. And whereas long-withstanding organizations such as the Filipino American Association of the Coachella Valley was founded in the 1960s, originally as the Palm Springs Filipino American Club to celebrate the Filipino community's diverse culture and honor our war veterans. National Alliance of Filipino Americans has provided free medical outreach in Palm Springs and cultural programs throughout the Coachella Valley. And Bayanihan Desert, yes, that's us, was formed during the districting of Palm Springs in 2018 to engage Filipinos in the city and help shape the first majority-minority District 1, which includes Veterans Tract. And whereas Filipinos have contributed greatly to the cultural, intellectual, economic, social, spiritual, and political life of the United States and continue to shape the history of Palm Springs, the Coachella Valley, and the United States. And now, therefore, we, the City Council of the City of Palm Springs, California, do hereby proclaim October 2020 and every October thereafter as Filipino American History Month, and proclaim October 25th, 2020 and every October 25th thereafter as Larry Itliong Day in the city of Palm Springs, and urge all persons in the city and Coachella Valley region to join in this These important observances, Filipino American History Month and Larry Itliong Day, provide the opportunities to promote the study of Filipino American history and culture, recognize the richness of Filipino American experience, and honor the contributions of Filipino Americans. It's signed by the Mayor Jeff Kors, Mayor Pro Tem Christy Holstage, and Council members Lisa Middleton, Grace Elena Garner, and Dennis Woods. Amen.
That's great.
Thanks, Napoleon. Thanks, y'all. And we're at 2:27, and so that is just the way to sort of open. I guess it's our opening prayer, right? I think Michelle. I know it's really when Grace came by this afternoon, and we'll share this later in Instagram. It's really like, again, it's this real symbolism, but it's a real level of like, we have to pay homage to our ancestors, to those who came before us, to those who are living. Like Jenny and I are literally here. We're taking care of mom. I come from a curatorial background, but I'm my mom's primary caregiver. And you know what? We have to look out for our people. I mean, this is for real. Like that mortality rate of our Filipino nurses and doctors is high in Southern California. This is a real issue. We need to save our people. And if we have to do these proclamations, and we could tell people, and we could tell the history of where we come from and who we are every day to those who are with us, sitting next to us at dinner, at Thanksgiving, at the holidays, on a Sunday afternoon, merienda time, make it happen. So today's focus, this is where you have to do like recenter, right? We almost want to do like another moment of silence, to be honest. But recenter today's virtual town hall. We've done a number of virtual town halls, and like I said, we started a few of them. One was on food insecurity, so we worked with Debbie Espinoza of the Fine Food Bank, which is based in the East Coachella Valley, and she's Pinay, and she's the CEO of probably the largest food bank in the desert. We also did a virtual town hall with our siblings, our Latinx and Black siblings here in Palm Springs, Dieter Crawford, Alexis Ortega, and Grace Elena Garner, to talk about the movement for Black lives. We also did a great virtual town hall with our sisters in the Inland Empire, Nicole Dumagindin and Francis Avalos, and they worked with us to look at mental health during this time of COVID. And today, I'm so honored to introduce our panel. We're going to look at, this month, the Filipino American History Month, is focusing on activism. And so, you know what? My natural inclination, I come from a group called Archipelago in New York. We looked at, the idea of artivism, when you put art and activism together. So there's this real sense of, there's real work, and a lot of work has been done for a long time, even before the 1990s. But we've got a panel of three artists and writers, cultural like heroes and leaders, culture warriors. Irene Soriano Saxon, Tala Mateo, and Napoleon Lustre. And they have been huge influences on so many of us. It's huge. We're very fortunate to have also, just to pay proper respect. Also, we've got Manong Freddy Agriam on the line too. He was going to be part of the panel, but he's part of at least the being present, which is great. And to that the work that Tala, Irene, and Napoleon have done, and Freddie have done, is immense, and you'll see it in the presentation today. So I wanted to introduce our first presenter, and Irene Soriano Saxon is, I mean, there's a lot to say about her work, and I'm so glad I could actually plug a book, because look, okay, that's all I have to say. I don't even have to say anything else. Just, she writes, she believes in us every day, and like, you know what? Take it away, Irene.
Thank you, Edwin. Thanks for the invitation to be able to speak today about, the 90s and activism and curation. That was a very, very amazing time for Filipino American I was gonna say actors, no, artists. And It was vibrant, it was full of energy, new things came on. And so one of the things I wanted to start with is I wanted to do a little slide presentation of the flyers from the events that happened in the 90s. So this was, we're looking at 1994 to about 2001. So there were a ton of events, and it was just such a fun time to be a writer. And, you know, was the internet up yet back then? I don't even remember when that shift happened. But, you know, but I do remember sending out flyers through the mail. I mean, who does that now? But so here's the presentation. Might look a little wonky, but bear with me.
Perfect. You're perfect, Irene.
Thank you.
Down here. Yeah, down there.
So that the last two slides were projects from two students at that time who wrote about that time in LA history, you know, the spoken word scene, the literary scene. So I'll talk about that a little bit later. But, you know, before I continue, I really I always want to start these kind of presentations, kind of like honoring ancestors, but honoring my literary mentors who started me on this path. And the one person I always will, you know, mention each time is a Ghanaian African writer, African-American writer, Mary. Well, she was Mary Nanama Dankwa back then, but now she's Nanama Dankwa. And she was a writer that I met who was running the reading series at LACMA. And when I met her, she invited me, and she, you know, she really showed me what a reading series, how it operates, and what you do. And then she asked me informally one evening, she said, Irene, are there or is there an Asian American reading series in LA? And I said, no. And then she said, okay, you're gonna do it. And I said, what? And she said, I'm gonna teach you how to write a slamming proposal, and you're going to go to a museum that you think will host it, and you're gonna get it done. And of course, I had just graduated, 2 years before, and I had just dropped out of law school, and so I was a little bit insecure. But she forced me. She, when Mary says something, it gets done. And so we talked about it, and she said, well, who are the writers in your community? And I'm like, I don't know. And she's like, okay, do some research. And I had graduated from Loyola Marymount University, which is a very lily white university. And which is one of the reasons why I really wanted to do this reading series, is to find my community of writers. And so I wrote this proposal, and it's, let's see, it's about 8 pages. And I walked in to the Japanese American National Museum. I met with one of the higher ups, and then they probably thought I was some strange stranger from the street. And I said, hey, I want to host this series in your museum. And the most important thing, which Mary taught me, and I've brought to this day, is that get paid. Art, as an artist, do not do things for free unless it's a passion project that you want to donate your time to, but otherwise get paid. And I said, here's the proposal, here's a list of writers, here's a budget. Can we do this? And she kind of looked at me like I was crazy. I remember it was a Kemi, I forgot her last name, but she was one of the, higher ups at the Japanese American National Museum. And she said, okay, we'll get back to you. And so I left that meeting. I'm like, I don't know if it's going to happen. But, they called me back and they said, yes, we will fund like the first maybe 3 readings. And it happened. And, 4 years later, it was still going. And they funded each one. My writers got paid. And I got paid. So I really owe a lot to Mary, and I'm very happy to be able to say that. Another person that kind of brought me on this path is, also a writer and HIV/AIDS activist, Joel Tan. When I met him in UCLA at a reading, and I was blown away. I've never met anybody like Joel. And his reading, the way he reads poetry, it's just really visceral. And when after the reading, we were outside the classroom, and the first thing he said to me was, "Are you a lesbian?" And I looked at him like, "Huh?" I'm like, "No." And then he's like, "Oh, okay." And then from that time on, we hung out. And I made him the first writer, along with who was it? Who did he read with? Oh, Karen Yamashita, and they opened up my Wrestling Tigers reading series. So that was great. And you know what? If I had not met Joel, I would not be sitting here right now. So he really opened me up to this community of amazing Asian Pacific American writers and Filipino artists. I would not have met Napoleon if I had not met Joel. So, and also another writer that's really instrumental in me kind of like figuring out this path to curation and writing, interestingly enough, is Celine Parenya. I think she goes Celine Parenya Shimizu. I saw her read at the Festival of Philippine Arts and Culture, I think the second one, and I was blown away. I'm like, who is this woman reading a poem that spoke to me? And that made me realize that I also could, my poetry, that I could go up into a stage and read it out loud and be as amazing as she was. So just to make clear, all these things were going on. Like I did the Wrestling Tigers reading series, and then I did the Festival of Philippine Arts and Culture. I curated the literary component, and but there were a lot of other groups that were curating events in Los Angeles. So there was a Pinay named Cynthia Ignacio who ran UAAN. And then there was the Balagtasan Collective. I think they were a little later in the 90s, but they were also having their events. And then of course, Linda Nietes of Philippine Expressions had her events. And of course, there was the Festival of Philippine Arts and Culture, and then Disorient Journal. So, during that time, it was really exciting. And a lot of people were doing a lot of things because, in the sort of the larger spectrum, a favorite word back at that time for writers of color were tokenism. Was tokenism. And there would be readings in more established venues, but there'd be that one Asian American, or there'd be that one Latin, Latino or Latina writer. But for the most part, you didn't see any Filipino Americans or Filipinx or Filipino Americans. So I feel that it was right. It was a ripe time for all those things to be happening. I want to read a section, it's very short, from Professor Alan Aquino, who teaches in CSUN. He also teaches the Filipino American experience there. His MA, what do you call it? It's not a dissert, is it? His MA thesis, yeah. His MA thesis is called Filipino American Poetics, Roots, Adaptations, and Current State. And he did this at UCLA back in 2000. So he says that during that time, and he quotes Napoleon here. I guess he interviewed Napoleon. So he says, for many poets, public readings serve as a democratic means of sharing one's work and conveying one's visions without restrictions from publishers, censors, and literary critics. And I really agree with that. I was young, and I didn't see curating as kind of like a career pathway. So I wasn't worried about anything. I just did what I wanted to do. And I wanted to invite the writers that I wanted to invite. So it was very freeing, and it was an amazing, the result was amazing. A lot of the writers that established themselves later on, we all started in the 90s. So I'm really happy to see, what's grown from the 90s and people still doing that work. Another thing I'm going to read really quick is it's an ethnographic study by Cheryl Ann Lau Sampson. And this was written in 2001. And I know she's in here. Hi, Cheryl. And the title of her project is Filipino American Spoken Word Performance Artists, Poets of Los Angeles. She basically kind of describes why I did a lot of the stuff I do. And so she said, there was an absence of space created for Filipino Americans to read their work and recite their poetry during the late 80s and 90s. Irene became very involved in literary organizing. So we put together readings because they realized there was no one out there for them. They realized they had to take care of themselves. And true enough, that's what we did. We were not invited to the larger readings. We were not invited to museums. So, we're talking LACMA and stuff like that, and the big festivals. And so we created our own events. During that time, I was working in the HIV/AIDS arena, and I saw, how a lot of the issues that we deal with in HIV/AIDS outreach, about the erasure of Asian Pacific Americans, the stigmatization, I realized, even within the Asian American community, something needed to change. And so through these readings, what I think Eric Watt, who's a community academic or community researcher, sorry, Eric, he said it was something of like queering a space. So we would bring individuals and writers to very conservative spaces, you know, like the Japanese American National Museum. And I would have queer writers. I would have just basically people that they probably would never book to read. So I feel that this was a way for me to kind of fight that erasure or and it was a really great experience because a lot of these writers are now published and just doing amazing things. So it's nice to know that I played a part in setting up a space for them to kind of grow. So that's my thing.
Hello.
So
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, while Napoleon is speaking, I will be sharing a screen to show images related to his talk.
Okay. Do I go now?
Wait 1 second, Napoleon. Wait 1 second, okay?
Oh, sure.
I want to give a proper, and
Yeah,
thank you
please.
so much, Irene, I want to make sure that we give you a proper introduction as well. So, this is where we get into like a disjuncted narrative, right? Or a fun disjuncted narrative. But I want to give proper introduction to Irene. Irene Soriana Saxon, pronouns she, her, hers, is a poet, independent literary and film curator, and co-founder of the multidisciplinary community arts project Tres Marix with visual artist Tala Mateo and filmmaker Ara Chowdhury. So she is the author of 2 poetry collections, Safe Houses and Primates from an Archipelago. Okay, I lost my screen. Wait 1 second.
Hold on. Go back. There you go.
And an IG at Archipelago poem, and was featured in the Los Angeles Times for curatorial participation in the groundbreaking NEA-funded World Beyond Poetry Festival that featured over 100 plus poets from the diverse communities of LA. Word up. And Irene, this is the whole thing, and I appreciate the slideshow, and I think I'd love for us to maybe even return to that before we end today, just so that we get we could live with the images a little bit more. But I want you to have that space. Irene has been curating literary readings since 1994 and programming film events since 2000, and her favorite curatorial projects include Wrestling Tigers of 1994 to 1998, the first reading series in the Los Angeles to showcase Asian Pacific American writers at the Japanese American National Museum, the literary component of the Festival of Philippine Arts and Culture, FPAC, from 94 to 2000 for Film Arts, LA, Visions and Voyages, Images of Filipinos in America of 2002 with Rima Añosa for the Filipino-American National Historical Society, Los Angeles, the social commentary independent film and video shorts from the Philippines of 2009, and Flipping, the music video of 2014 with Elaine Dulalas from the Echo Park Film Center. Irene draws deep inspiration from the dynamic and profound works of queer activists, as she says, thank you, of color, and stays committed to amplifying historically underrepresented and lesser heard voices within Los Angeles and beyond. So we're going to hear more about Tres Marix too when Tala comes up, I'm sure. But I wanted to give you that proper reintroduction, and we'll have more of a conversation too. But now I want to introduce Napoleon Lustre, and again to break from like what we just did. Napoleon is a poet and cultural worker and AIDS activist. He started volunteering for the Asian Pacific AIDS Intervention Team in 1992 before becoming a community health outreach worker and treatment advocate there. He also worked at Being Alive, Los Angeles as director of programs and as acting executive director. He was a community health specialist at Alameda County, working with Filipino men who have sex with men who use crystal methamphetamine. Today, he serves on the Inland Empire HIV Planning Council. Napoleon has read and performed at many venues, including Japanese American National Museum, UCLA, the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, and the Festival of Philippine Arts and Culture. He is one of the founders of Purarte, the Filipino American Gallery and Cultural Space. And I want to say, you know, and I was a little relaxed at the beginning because you know what, this is our family, you know, and it's always amazing to be able to do programming with folks who you've admired for a long time, but also you know we've all worked together too, which is great, and I want to give that proper attention. And you know the list of folks that you listed, for instance, Irene earlier, the from Mary to Eric to Cheryl, you know, to Joel, Tan. I mean, there's the list of folks that we all are connected to and are still connected to, and thankfully are still connected to means a lot, and it helps propel us. So take it away, Napoleon. It's your chance now, and we'll
Okay.
to slideshow now. Thanks for your patience.
I basically my story is about story of Puro Arte, the gallery and cultural space in LA that started in late 97 and ran for about 15 to 17 months. Um, to have our own space, cultural space in Filipino town, in historic Filipino town, was just this fantasy that many of us had. And it just so happened that at that time, I actually got a job that paid. You know, in AIDS work, there weren't a lot of positions that paid us, but I actually got a good job at being alive. And so I was able to put aside a little bit for the monthly rent, along with Ruben Domingo, who was my partner, in paying for this space. And I think you know, a lot can be said for kind of this newer phenomenon of the pop-up space and kind of these alternative spaces. But having your own, solid brick and mortar space, there's just no alternative to that. And so for about 15 months or so, we had kind of like this utopian moment of having a place where we could have gallery shows, we could have lectures, we could screen film, we had a play, we had writing workshops. I mean, there was just all these things happening at this one place. But the way that we got there, you know, if people can imagine the 90s, I think there has to be something said about the moment of that time, because there was just something very ripe. There was just something very ripe in the air. There was so much going on between the cultural stuff that was coming out of the AIDS corner, and then other API stuff going on. Even the Pacific Islander community was very active, as opposed to the Asian American community. You know, there was just this thing kind of bubbling over in the air, and it was a real really good time for me. I had come out my own experience. I had come out as as a gay activist. I was the co-chair of the Gay and Lesbian Student Union at UC Irvine for 2 years before I dropped out, and so that was where I kind of got my first training as a community organizer. But when I came out, I was really dead set on working in the Filipino community as an openly gay man. I really wanted to be to kind of erase that divide that usually happened between for gays and lesbians of color, for GLBTs of color, where we had to do our own our GLBTs politics separate from our people of color politics, and we decided, I think, part of the movement to say that we will not live this divide anymore. And so I was very dead set on doing Filipino community work where I was an openly gay man, and doing AIDS work in the Filipino community was one way I could do that. I remember with Irene trying to do organize the entire LA community under the Filipino AIDS Task Force, and we lobbied the LA City, the LA County HIV Planning Council for 3 years in the works, lobbying them for funding to do HIV prevention specifically for the Filipino community, because at the time, Filipinos led the numbers in AIDS cases in the LA County, and by a lot. I mean, it was astounding. It was like the second largest group was the Japanese Americans, and they had half our numbers of AIDS cases. And then the Chinese were like far behind. But Filipinos were just leading the numbers in AIDS cases. And Irene and I kind of organized the community. We contacted anybody and everybody that was doing AIDS work at every level in the city, and we got them all in a room, and we had a meeting of about 50 people that got Proyecto Kuya funded under SIPA, which of course Tala Mateo coordinated. Um, but that was the kind of work that we were doing. But also, while we were doing that kind of AIDS work, we were also doing cultural work. We were doing our AIDS work through cultural work, where Irene did a lot of the Wrestling Tigers stuff, where AIDS themed and formed. Um, so it's I don't want to underestimate the queerness of this activism that was happening, but it was also in my memory of the time. It was a time when the straight world, the Filipino straight world, was very open to us. I think for the first time, there was a lot of challenging their own homophobia and stepping up as our allies in the activism. So we found a real utopian moment, I think, when people were working together, and there was not a lot of the old, a lot hard set homophobia of the past. And then among other things that were happening in the Filipino community, there was just this bubbling everywhere. I mean, UC Irvine had memories of overdevelopment and artists and academic conference. That was so exciting. That's actually when I wrote my poem Conditions, was after an evening of that event. Los Angeles, UCLA had Must Mud Eat Mud. The Festival of Filipino Arts and Culture was happening in Los Angeles every year. So by 1997, we're thinking, okay, this is the centennial of what I call the transfer of empire from the Spanish Empire to the United States Empire of the Philippines. And so I thought we need to commemorate this. We need to somehow address this as a community. And wouldn't it be great if there was a place where all the artists and writers and cultural workers that we know already had an automatic home we could just do the programming, just build a year-long set of programming that could address this. And it didn't feel like the topic was too narrow. We could address it in a myriad of ways, and it was open to however people wanted to address it. And also the fact that it was the same year as Puerto Rico, Cuba, Hawaii, and Guam, and I thought there was a lot of potential for cross programming with other communities. So we went for it, and if I told you how cheap the rent was at the time, you would cry. But we were able to sustain it for about 15 to 17 months. The shows that Irene screened earlier, some of the graphics that she screened earlier were from some of the exhibitions that happened at that gallery. After one thing we did not ever master was how to build revenue. We could put up a show, but we didn't really have a community that purchased art at that level. So it was gonna be, and we were too young and green to really know how the fundraising was done. And so after about 17 months, we decided to bring it down. But looking, in retrospect, it was such a magical time because things just lined up, and the stuff was there. It was almost like that baseball movie, if you build it, they will come. I mean, we built it, and it just happened. It just happened, and it was shows that I'm very very proud of. Um, like Civilo Domine's art, traffic, and um, it was just a magical time, and for anybody that got to be there, um, you know, yeah, just we were lucky. We were at a blessed time. Yeah, that's all I have to say for now.
Thank you, Napoleon.
I hope I was coherent.
Yeah, very. And this is the whole thing about, and I'm glad again you're bringing up a lot of great references. It's wonderful to be here about the again, just like what Irene said earlier, the use of queering the space that Eric Watt talked about. You and Ruben Domingo, though he's not queer necessarily, we talk about that later. But Purarte was not necessarily just a queer space, right? So like, but it bridged, the level of bringing in different aspects of our community together. And I'm glad you brought it up because '98 was, everyone talks about the centennial moment, right, of 1998. The centennial moment was a big deal. It was 100 years since 1898, and a lot of us were doing organizing and programming throughout the country around the centennial of Philippine independence. Of course, it was always it was always that bittersweet thing about it because it was like, okay, Philippine independence, but we are within a colonial empire from until 1946, and of course our neo-colonial relationship. And I think memories of overdevelopment totally like cover that. I want to thank you again, Napoleon and Irene, for that. We're gonna get to our third and these are all things that are bringing up, and again also bringing up the AIDS pandemic is key. The level of you and Irene and Tala and folks who everyone who was doing the AIDS activism during that time and now even is very much telling, because you know what, we're faced with a new pandemic, where this is where we need we need y'all to survive, because we need to be able to still keep these skills of surviving a pandemic, living with a pandemic, living with AIDS, living with COVID. Like this is real. Living with HIV is real. So I want to get to our next presenter, and then we'll get to a Q&A. It's only just a little few minutes after 3 o'clock, so we're doing good time. So thank you. But let me get to a quick thing. And just to be a little transparent, our traffic, I think I was I had work in that one, so I actually made work at one point. Um, we have Tala Mateo, and I Tala Mateo is part of Tres Marix, and I think that might be a great chance again to talk about what Tres Marix is doing. And I previewed your presentation, so but I want to give a personal introduction because Tala has been a real sister and comadre, kabsat, which is kapatid, and like, just as with Napoleon and Irene, I mean, we have built a family. I mean, this is funny because I just came back from New York like 6 years ago, and we have this list of folks. You mentioned Cirillo Domine, so Cirillo is the kapsat, kapatid in this cultural work, and in and we're witnesses to the work that all of you have done. Irene, Napoleon, and Tala. I was so proud to include Tala's work in a number of projects. One in particular called Me Love You Long Time, which looked at the construction of sexuality and sex work in contemporary art, especially by artists of Southeast Asian ancestry, and in particular our Pinoy artists. But Tala has also been working closely with Irene with Tres Marix. To be transparent, also, there's a relationship to Purarte, and clearly one of the things that Bayanihan Desert was part of, and and is that Michelle and a number of us also met a number of folks who were also on this call through Kita Kits. And Kita Kits was also another wonderful, again, communal experience that brought a lot of us together just a few years back. Pre-pandemic, clearly. So in our pandemic world of COVID-19, what are these next things? And Tala and Irene and Napoleon are definitely signaling what what kind of models have been but are continuing as well, such as FPAC, which is the Philippine Festival of Philippine Arts and Culture. But Tala, thank you for being part of this panel. So I want to let you take it away, and let's go.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Edwin and Bayanihan Desert, for inviting me into this panel. This is kind of like a bit of a walk down memory lane for me, and it was kind of nerve-wracking because I'm starting to forget a lot of things in my head, not just age, but also COVID and all the kind of situations that we're dealing with, and also while we're all in trying to kind of keep ourselves safe, trying to do work, making work, and also trying to survive. So, in between trying to kind of put together a presentation, which I think is much more formal than what Irene and Napoleon gave, I was kind of in this stress mode going, okay, how am I going to do this? Because, in the 90s, I was a new kid on the block, and I wanted to kind of, I wrote that into my presentation to kind of give a chronology of how I got into working, in activism in art and being part of the Filipino community in Los Angeles. I'm still, after 20 some odd years in Los Angeles, I still feel like the new kid on the block, and I'm still learning. And so at the same time, I'm meeting all these amazing people, trying to balance that out with, trying to survive. So, like I said, there are a lot of things that, a lot of stories and a lot of incidences that Irene and Napoleon brought out that I totally forgot. But, in my preparation of this presentation, but here I go. Okay, so I will start off with saying, art and activism are two words that we don't naturally associate together. When we talk about art, we think an artist who creates art, and we, as the audience, view in the quiet contemplation. When we talk about activism, we especially these days, before an election, we think about marching, protesting, and raising good hell. But I think, and I would argue, in their most powerful manifestations and in their intersections, art and activism both demand what we ask, the fundamental questions of who we are, where we come from, and where we're going. How we answer these questions inform how we act in this world, the basis for any form of activism. In this presentation, I offer you my answers to these questions and how these answers inform my approach to activism. So, my development of this, even though I was born to a father serving in the US military, I had spent the beginnings of my life in the Philippines with my mother and her family. She was a single parent for the most part, but surrounded with family and community. At the age of 9, my mother and I immigrated from the Philippines to be with my father. Being a US military dependent was a life on the move, in silence, in observation, in following orders and directives from a culture that I was still trying to understand. Despite the fact that I am a Filipino immigrant / American, and am a part of a Filipino immigrant / American family, I spent my pre-adolescent years in Germany, which did not provide the easiest transition to my eventual landfall in the United States. After California and Hawaii, my parents would eventually buy a home in Hepzibah, Georgia. Despite such an introduction to American life, I survived high school, graduated from UC Santa Cruz. This was the time I started to ask the kind of questions that eventually led me to you today while living in my car. Okay, sorry, I have to do this really quick. In 1996, hold on one second. So I'm going to share a slideshow. So in 1996, a friend and I drove my home on wheels to UCI, where for the first time, I found myself surrounded by Filipino and Filipino-American artists. Memories of Overdevelopment was organized by Cirilo Domine and Vince Govea, along with UCI instructors who would become my mentors years later. Memories of Overdevelopment was the largest gathering of Filipino and Filipino-American artists I have ever encountered. It was glorious and inspiring. I wasn't planning to stay in Southern California, but my friend took flight back to San Francisco, left me in unfamiliar territory. Then my car broke down. My question became more general, more urgent. What now? How now? The answer came from two organizations, Search to Involve Filipino Americans and the Festival of Philippine Arts and Culture. I assisted FPAC in the production of Ballet Philippines at the Ford Amphitheater. Another cherry popped, another first for me, a Filipino ballet company. All I ever knew of the Philippine dance at the time was from Filipino Cultural Nights, PCN, and being recruited to be a dancer with Larawan, a small Filipino traditional dance company in Alameda with roots to Bayanihan and Ramon Ubusan. Many people assumed I would be in New York, but Los Angeles opened its arms and welcomed me in. It was around this time that I was introduced to dear friends and artists like Napoleon Lustre, Irene Soriano, Gil Mangawan, and Joel Tan, and to nonprofit organizations, SIPA, to name one, and the Asian Pacific AIDS Intervention Team. It was also the time that I found myself in HIV/AIDS prevention work. Proyecto Kuya, a culturally sensitive program targeting Filipino and Filipino-American men and youth. It was groundbreaking, for the lack of better words. If anyone remembers this time, there was a lot to fear and uncertainty, but also a lot of life to celebrate and look forward to. It was as important to hold space and community as it was to recognize the looming issue that is HIV/AIDS. Needless to say, the program did not last. The aspects of the project's identity in the heteronormative setting, along with limited funding, proved challenging on top of the very cultural issues that the program had set out to address. HIV/AIDS, being Filipino versus being Filipino-American, being gay, being bakla, anonymity, identity, family, shame, the list goes on. Beyond that, on a more personal and private level of contemplation, a trans person running a men's program. What's a tranny to do now? To answer that, I applied to grad school in studio art at UCI. But then other questions came. They came from my mother, questions articulated by someone who loved me. What jobs are there for artists? How will you make money? How will you live? Back then, it was not so much about the money or the job, as it was more about discovering who I was and who I wanted to be, a sense of self in my own shifting landscape. In my continued exploration, I hope to express and chronicle my complex issues to and with gender, employing genderized materials and objects to reveal layers and shifts to navigate through. Painting still life of tomatoes using lipsticks to explore derogatory terms of fruit or vegetable, while trying to maintain a sense of seduction for consumption. Covering up the grittiest sandpaper with cream foundation in an attempt to erase facial masculine features. Suturing nylons as a tool to further erase masculinity in hopes to enhancing femininity. Gathering hair to create tools for communication, but also to explore feminine subjugation in veils and embroideries. The use of makeup and peel-off masks to document intimate acts of love and positions of power. Bottom or the use of peel-off masks to capture and document relationships diminished by time and degraded by memories. Beyond that, a mixture of peel-off masks and liquid foundation to stimulate skin as an interactive exploration in race relations and notions of beauty. Who are we? Where are we from? Where do we go? In attempting to answer questions of identity for myself, to the expressions afforded questions were also questions asked by those seeking to act. In collaborating with artists like Irene Soriano in her book, Primates of an Archipelago, the first collaborative project through Kita Kits, an artist incubation program who gathered to create space, community, conversation, and collaboration, and where it would be safe to examine these questions. Film Arts. I found my way back 2013 and 2014 as a program director. Programming, we showcased the American artists from traditional to contemporary dance, music, visual arts, and more. This was by far the largest work I've done in the arts, taking space, presenting culture, claiming ourselves in all its spectrum and activism. Filipino Workers Center. For the 20th anniversary of the Filipino Workers Center, we celebrated and highlighted stories from home healthcare workers. And also for CICLAB, for Larry Leong Day in 2018, to celebrate the activism of Filipino farm workers and labor movements. I come to full circle, sort of, curating Atras Abante, a collaborative art exhibition between Puro Arte, Kita Kits, and Regis House, and support from Pinay Clothing. The intent of Atras Abante was to address the issue of gentrification in Filipino town and explore the role of arts and artists in community. The exhibit comprised of 7 artists, 5 from the archives of Puro Arte to address Atras, to look back, and 2 artists for Abante, not just to address the move forward, but to acknowledge that art in our community is alive and continues to grow. So much took place, not without its hiccups, but I give special thanks to the artists like Freddie, Cirillo, Marlon, Mary Rose, Christine, Chris, and Ray, and also to the venue, Regis House, Sister Albertina and Sister Teresita. I'm not sure how to qualify the success of Atras Abante and the events that took place, but I hope that it was important enough to inspire and activate a new generation of artists, activists, and organizers in creating space, holding community, and provoke conversation. If not that, but just to catch up with old friends and create new ones. I come to a point in a spiral where a circle comes to an illusionary end, hoping its revelation may mean something to you. For a trans male to female presenting Filipinx, which altogether in my head still translate as bakla artist, what does it mean to assert privilege and reveal personal portraits, exposing alternative possibilities of existence? I take a look back at these 2 pieces that continue to question positions of power for me, traces and dirty data, bottom or bossy bottom. One, a personal portrait in submission, documented in makeup. The other, reveal an alternative position of power expressed in peel-off mask of male lovers, as if to mark territory. Both examine private, intimate acts in passion, in connection, in relation, not so different from other acts in passion, in connection, in relation, in an attempt to reveal who you, they are, or may wish to be. Wouldn't the questions in the process reveal the intersection between art and activism? With a flip of a switch, community and support, anything is possible. You are possible.
That's beautiful, Tala. Thank you. Oh my gosh. It's all comes together, right? So
Yeah.
thank you so much. We're, And you brought up so much, and I think that's what's really amazing about it. And thank you for the visuals as well. Just as with the visuals that we had during Irene and Napoleon's presentations, I think you brought up names again, and it's great to hear about SIPA, the Search to Involve Filipino Americans, FPAC again, the Festival for Philippine Arts and Culture. It's great to hear Mary Rose. We got to give it up to Mary Rose Covarrubias Mendoza, right? Mary Rose has been a key artist and scholar and just phenomenal. It's great to hear Vince Golbeo's name. Again, great to hear Cirillo Domine's name. I want to also add a few other names to it. Rico Reyes is another artist that I met who is also now doing curatorial work. I also met some amazing artists. Again, Napoleon, if I remember seeing you read for the first time through the Asian Pacific American Journal, I think. There was the journal where maybe it was through that, or it was definitely a reading, but I remember the work of artists such as that came through there as but I also remember some of the other artists that came through UC Irvine, like the artists like Huang Tanwen and like Young Chan. These are folks who are having a huge impact today. And I want to also give a shout out to Manu Freddy Agriam, who's here in the house too. Grupo de Gago, Manuel Ocampo in the 90s was a big deal. So, we have to give him a shout out. I'm so glad to hear that Arzamura Limark is in the house as well. So Zach, hey. Thanks for being here. But again, there's a whole bunch of folks, and I know that Cheryl Deptowitz Diaz, who's also on the line. I know that I saw your name on some of the listings there too. So there's a level of like how people come back together again. Working in different fields and different industries, but knowing that this sort of creative activism, cultural activism that came out of the 90s and continues now has had a huge impact. Thank you, Tala, for talking about also the military life, being a military kid, talking about being homeless. There's a lot of things that come to that we need to address, and they are personal narratives, but they're also clearly ways for us to rally behind and to remember and to continue our activism around making sure that our communities are taken care of. I want to open it up because we're at 3:24 now. I want to open it up because we've got a wonderful panel of folks, and clearly, like we have about 22 people. Michelle, Jenny, if you want to, we could go ahead and if folks want to be unmuted, we could unmute. But if you have any specific questions, I had a lot of questions. And we could address one that I have, but I want to definitely go to a Q&A with people who are on board because I got to give a shout out to my colleagues with Archipelago who are in the house too. So we've got this East Coast West Coast thing going on, but I love that this is very much again like Filipino centric and also looking at LA and Southern California. My big question, and I brought this up y'all yesterday when we were getting ready, was to look at how Irene, Napoleon, Tala, all three of you have survived the 90s. We're in 2020, and and the 90s is way back when now. This is a long time ago. Mom Freddy, we've survived the 90s. We've survived it for some reason. We have survived. We're alive. But one of the things about it is we survive because we actually have to get over or get through struggles. We know that the Festival of Philippine Arts and Culture has had a lot of different transformations. If you could address one, where was FPAC? What was some of the biggest obstacles maybe about FPAC, and why, and where it's now? And a lot of us have been following you all on Instagram, and you know what? There's programming going on right now till today, right, for FPAC and film arts, film arts. So that's one question. And in conjunction with that, Napoleon, I'm glad you brought it up. We don't have a strong market for the work of our artists, both writers and visual artists, performance, everything. It's a struggle still. We could talk about Manuel, we could talk about our, Paul Pfeiffer, we could talk about whomever, but like the reality is our visual artists and our writers still don't have a largesse of money and resources going to them. We need to figure out what that means. We could break it down about racial racial commodification or what have you. there's a lot of stuff we could talk about in regards to that. But why is it, Napoleon, that that we're still struggling with that we can't talk about our livelihood in regards to making it as artists? So one, y'all talk about FPAC. Where is it? Where was it? What was the big obstacle? And two, where it's at? And then Napoleon, all of us could talk about this. Why is there not a strong commercial market for our artists? Who wants to start? Okay, go ahead, Irene.
So I curated for FPAC early on. So like the third FPAC, we're now on like 27, I think, on the 27th FPAC. And the one difference that I do sense is there was a lot more freedom given to curators back then. But I think it was because there was really nothing. So in comparison to now, what is it, 95 to now 2020, arts, presentation, exhibition, whatever, it's really grown. So now I believe organizers have an idea of what they want. So that's what they look for, right? And that's what they ask their curators to kind of do. But back in 95, I could pretty much say, these are the artists I want. This is a program I'm going to do. This is the budget I would like for you to consider. And then it got done. There was no real, not interference, but there was no like, oh, well, let's see what you're doing. Let's see if this fits with whatever. It was a really trusting relationship, with curators. So I did it for 6 years, and I feel like that was the mood back then. So I kind of burned out, as a lot of organizers do, and I stopped curating for FPAC. And so I think Tala came in midway, right? So she can speak to what happened after 2000.
Well, I was actually I was part of FPAC before it became Film Arts. So the version that we're seeing now of FPAC is actually under Film Arts. That was helmed and started by Jilly Canizares, which is also kind of like a big mover and shaker in the arts administration field for the Filipino Americans here. She really pushed to make that bigger. It was one of her projects. So when I started with the festival, I was doing Ballet Philippines. It was a small little office in the corner in Sipa. And we were trying to bring in this big ballet company that was touring internationally. That was my beginning with FPAC. It wasn't until years later, 2013 and 2014, that Jilly asked me to kind of take over the program with FPAC. Those years, even though I kind of dropped off the community to go to grad school, I had a relationship, but I still kind of kept anchored to the festival because I'd spoken to Jilly a lot. And there was definitely, you asked the question of like, how do we keep pushing so that artists can get paid? We were trying to work that out in the festival during the time that I was there. But, for what it was, FPAC was amazing. And we tried to get as many artists paid as much as possible and also showcase them. And there was really this really amazing LA flavor about it because everybody in the trenches knew everybody else, right? And so that's how we were able to support each other. In 2014, the board of directors decided to move the festival to downtown LA. For the longest time, it was in Cabrillo Beach. And that was major. That was really hard. But then at the same time, we were also dealing with how do we deal with this money situation because it was such an expense. to move from one venue to another venue. But at the same time, we needed to make sure to kind of keep putting our people out there, to keep putting our artists out there. How do we become a bigger part of the LA community, right? Through trials and tribulations, we did it.
Be careful.
And it was really, really challenging. But the intent of the festival, working with Jilly, we were always trying to maintain, the health and safety, and also how do we keep making sure that the artists get paid, right? We did whatever we can to fundraise. We did whatever we can to advertise them and to market them. So, but it was a burnout. And that's the hard part, because it was such a big undertaking to present a cultural festival that spans a spectrum from dance to poetry to visual arts. And how do you contain all of that in one space in 2 days? And we'd always been fighting, why can't we do this more throughout the year rather than just having it in like a weekend? So, for me, I had left it because it was too much. It was a lot of work. There was definitely a burnout within those 2 years. But, we were really trying to push for programming throughout the year.
So how did you get re-energized? How did you
How can it be?
how did you reverse that?
How did I? Oh God, a lot of it is just by luck, to tell you the truth. And a lot of it is also through the community support. I mean, and it's really the resource that we have in our community, who are artists, who a lot of the people in our community don't look as an important part of the community. That's not a viable type of a job. But here it is. We're able to create space and community that these people are coming to, which means that the capital within our own community as artists is huge. I mean, just imagine the amount of, for the lack of a better term, the economy that happens in that festival. And the question is, how come our artists are not getting paid when all of these people are coming and supporting it, right? So those are questions that, sadly for me, after feeling so exhausted from 2 years of trying to do something huge, I wish that I could continue to have those discussions and to keep moving towards that, but it's really a lot. And I think for me, I'm also very, very conscientious about tapping into the energies of artists who also need their own kind of safety space and their safety nets, right? You can only do so much in continuing to tap people. So, so now I just kind of pull back, and I still talk to some of the people at the festival, or, trying to kind of organize, but this time a little bit more strategic, like with Trasmarix and Irene, and we always talk about artists need to get paid. We need to get paid. But we still need to kind of have that moment to understand that we should teach artists how to also manage themselves and to look at money that's not completely outside of the arts. It is part of the arts. It's the only way that we can thrive. And I think, just in the past, most artists don't have that training of administrations or looking at how money works, right? But I think with the resources that we have, we can begin to kind of like teach that to the new artists and new generation of artists, to not sway, from really looking at the nitty gritty of art, which is most of it is administration and finances. So I think for me, I'm always kind of trying to be there to assist with that, having conversations with Irene and other artists as well, really have that hard discussion. It's like, well, how are you valuing this, and how are you valuing your time? Because you are important. And it's just that matter of flipping that switch to understand that you are taking care of yourself.
I think we were flipping that switch also when you all got together with Purarte as Kita Kits with the Atrasabante exhibition. That was a big deal. We could talk more about Transmatics as well too, but I want to tap into Napoleon. What sparked that interest to bring it back? At that point, do you remember? Oh, sorry, you're muted.
Is that good?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
What
Okay. We were
what was
just
the
thinking that it was 20 years later. All of us were 20 years older, wiser. A lot of people were more established in their careers. Um, a lot of people had 20 years more knowledge, you know, of how to work the system. That it made it it made it like a new time, a new opportunity. But it was a lot harder than we, I think, expected. A lot of the same problems of raising revenue there are still there. Um, Although some of us have grown to become new, more experienced grant writers and things like that, it's still hard to pull everybody's time together and work together. You know, it takes a lot of organizing. Um, Burarte had like what 3 shows this last round before the pandemic kind of knocked us down. But it was showing to have a promising start, but it is a lot of work, and we're still not making the revenue from shows and things like that. People just don't buy art like we want them to. I don't have any particular insights on that. Maybe other people in the room do about what kind of art needs to be made for it to sell. Yeah.
those are great questions. I want to since we're at about 3:38. Do the panelists have questions for themselves, or do we want to go to other visitor, guests? Michelle,
Yes.
you by Anihan Desert, Manfredi.
Yeah, please, guests.
If not, I'm gonna keep I'm gonna keep drilling because you know what? We got put a few people on the hot seat right now. Oh, here we go. Okay. Oh, there's a question from El Aguilar. Hi, I have friends here in Houston, Texas, who are a loose collective of film artists called Philippine X Artists of Houston. Some of who are also activism oriented. Houston and Texas are not having that historical lineage of Filipino activism. Would any of you have any advice to offer on how to integrate Filipino arts and activism in a region that may not have as deep a support network as LA and the West Coast in general? Cheryl also had a question about solvency. You know, the idea of revenue, which you brought up, Napoleon, and I think it's still a question in the air. But here we've got a question from Al about doing programming, or how do you integrate Philippine arts and art activism in a region that doesn't have that deep support network yet? Anybody want to answer that?
I would begin. Oh, go ahead,
Okay.
Eileen.
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead. Go ahead, Sige.
Mine's really basic. Organize all the artists. Food is central to any event. Um, have people's families come to support them, and things will grow. That's just at the most basic. That's one basic place to start.
Irene?
Um, I see a lot of events and or event coordination going on right now, and I'm really amazed that they don't tap into the community. And I don't know what the community is like in Houston for Filipinx, the Filipinx population. But if that's small, I mean, look at universities and see if there are local, like, if not Filipinx student groups, like Asian American student groups, because there's a Filipino in there, who can maybe move your agenda. Also, um, one of the things that I wish I had done more when I was, in the 90s and towards the 2000s was collaborating with other organizations of color, and uh, looking at that, really have these, whatever the theme of your event might be, how does it relate to an existing organization that also maybe serve the purpose of the event? Like, go to them and say, you don't have to give us money, but if you have it, we would be welcome to it. But if you could help promote our events to your audienceship, that that would help in creating this network that may not be Filipinx, but still a community of supporters. I'm still very amazed that there are people organizing that don't tap into the community and the student body. And it doesn't have to be big, big box organizations. Like, start small, because there small organizations have that member who like has a deep pocket. You never know. So and of course the internet is now like amazing, and uh reach out. And yeah, that's what I have to say.
I love it. And I know that one of the really active artists out of Houston was Lordy Rodriguez. If you're familiar with Lordy Rodriguez, his work around mapping, for instance, I think that's one artist. I'm not sure if Lordy's still based out of Houston. Project Row Houses, which is comes out of Houston, is a big deal as well. And I think looking at them as a model, the work that Rick Lowe's done is fantastic. But and I'm glad you said that, Irene. And Napoleon's the practical ones, the practical advice is great, because we have been most successful when we're able to really uplift who we are and what we produce and the food we eat and the clothes we wear and the scent of the cooking in our houses and everything. But I think that real level of Houston. You know what? Houston is a very diverse city, and we know that our relationship also to other communities of color. One of the things that we've been trying to figure out here, also in the desert, for instance, is the labor history goes way back, right? We're talking about Filipinos and Mexicans in particular, Filipinos and Latinx Latinos. So there is a huge history of Mexicanos, of the one, not just the mixing, but clearly our relationship to our Mexican primos, our cousins who are Mexicans, goes way way back. This is going to the Acapulco, the Manila Galleon, right? So, and everything. So I think those are the kind of things that can really help promote the cross cultural programming that can happen. Michelle, do you have any things about Houston in particular? Texas or what have you? Mount Freddie, if do you have any words about you've been at it for a while. The work out of Grupo de Gago, for instance, collective work actually spurred a lot of energy as well. Do you want to talk about anything from the 90s in particular? I know you could talk about the municipal scandal of 1992, for instance.
Well, I think before Irene was on board at the festival, the Gago had shown in '93. We were invited to be part of that. Now, I don't know, like Irene said, they were really open to whatever. There was nobody, it was open, sky's the limit. So as a group of Gaga, it took us an opportunity to say, okay, we're gonna do something that's completely different from left field. And the community hated us. We got all the flack for that. We didn't understand. I mean, we didn't think we were mocking or whatever. We thought that's where we were coming from at that moment.
And what was it in particular that people thought was mocking?
The big one was the banner of the roasted barbecued dog with the swastika. Yeah, that one was we had to have a panel discussion with that, because the whole community was just on top of us, and we tried to explain that that was what we were thinking of at the time. We were approaching it from that sense. We weren't, dog eating was, they were calling us that, we were dog eaters, and okay, we had to address that issue. But also Manuel was way out there too. He had ideas, and so we were hitting it in all cylinders at that time. And they invited us, and I think they were expecting like landscapes and still lifes and all kinds of stuff. No, we were approaching it from all angles, from the gay community and from the feminine side, because I know we were in contact with a lot of people outside of the from Cal Arts, and all that stuff was happening. And also the OSCO, the Chicano collective there. We really got a lot of good education from Gronk. We saw him at the Onyx coffee shop. I don't know if you guys remember that coffee shop. It's not there anymore, but we used to hang out there.
Was
And
Grog
so,
an official member of Gago?
oh, I would say it was like 10 of us. There was a Canadian artist, also a writer, Pil Buen. I think he's a millionaire now. I'm not sure what's he doing in Canada.
You can buy some art, right?
Yeah,
Hey.
he did okay. Consider. You should might Google him. I know last time he was making some money, and then also we had people, but attending Cal Arts like Richard Ocampo. I don't know where he's at now, but he used to drive around with a BMW with a dog and do little things in LA. But that's but I guess what I was saying is that at the time that happened, it was like they didn't know where it was coming from, and so we had to sort of educate them in a way, but it was hard because they thought we were just a bunch of upstarts who didn't know much, and we didn't have anybody to connect with.
Yeah.
One of our major supporters was the writer for Dog Eaters, Hagendor. Yes.
Hagedorn.
Jessica Hagedorn.
Yeah,
Jessica Hagedorn.
yeah. Jessica was living in LA, I think, at the time, and she was so graceful to invite us to talk about those issues. So, yeah, that was really interesting. All that time.
Yeah, that banner that was actually censored. That was the whole point of the.
Yeah.
So
They-
this is actually a censorship case, a very well-known censorship case in Los Angeles in the early '90s, and it's well documented.
Yeah,
So I think, you know, hey, yeah, anything you want to?
Art Nodal, I think, was the administrator at the time, and I think what's her name was working under her. I'm under him. I'm not sure. You mentioned her name. Also, SIPA came to our rescue too. They supported us at
Right
the
on.
time when we thought we were all. But that was interesting. That's a whole different story for another time. But yeah, that was the beginning of it.
Irene?
I think for the
Yeah, I remember that controversy and I was amazed. I disagree. I think you're right. I think they were expecting mountains and people fishing in the streams, like that kind of artwork, which is fine, but not to be open to more subversive sort of I don't know, themes. I mean, it was respectability. It was
And the thing was,
after.
and the thing was, in the middle of City Hall. It was in the rotunda.
Right.
Yeah, that took
and-
a lot of
And Rochelle had like this vagina painting or something. I don't know what it was.
I mean, that's amazing.
and
love
and I think we got the flack because children was going through there. Yeah, I guess we could have put a plaque, but that was way before that type of stuff was happening. We just did. They told us, "Can you do it?" Yeah, sure. And the next thing you know, they were just, what's all this stuff happening in here? It's just-
I got the stickers. You guys made stickers of the dog. I have it still.
Yeah, we stuck that in everybody's car when they parked. And that was
Walang ya, one ba inyo?
Right.
Ulos. I mean, it's totally like, and I break this up because this is sort of the flavor, right? That if you will, of how '90s activism. You've got a lot, right? We have a lot. In fact, we have so many things sort of lined up against our survival, right? One will be censored. We'll be asked to do something. Expected to do social realist stuff, which actually I give to give proper props to someone like Eliseo Art Silva, who's huge mural in Filipino town in Unidad Park is very important. Also, and of course, a lot of the projects he's done, but yeah, where someone mentioned that, like, where is subversion? Now, is it subversive? Would this be subversive now? Like what we're talking about? I think it still would be, to be honest.
Well, at the time there's a lot of things going on. We knew there were a lot of other Filipinos out there who were doing things. I know we connected with Diwa up north.
Diwa, Northern California.
And I know something up there was happening. I knew that was the next level with Diwa because they're doing a lot of community stuff up there. And I could see they were scratching the surface with that.
And we have to give, so you're going to talk about Diwa. I mean, we got to give props to someone like Carlos Villa, who, Carlos Villa is like,
Carlos, yeah.
Rest in peace. I mean, literally one of our Manong artists, I I like to sort of pull it back because we're almost at 4 o'clock, and I know we could go on for days about this. But I'm glad we were able to talk about these things because I think I think we're tapping into it, right? You know, and I think the level of how do we self-preserve in order to keep doing the work is really important. Michelle, did you have any questions that you wanted to ask? I mean, to sort of bridge to like your generation. This is the Gen Y, millennial
Yeah,
Gen. You know, what
millennial here.
the Gen Xers and the baby boomers who are talking, but you know we are in this intergenerational moment. What's going on? What's up?
Yeah, I hear about the exhaustion and being burnt out and being also myself an artist, interdisciplinary artist and community organizer and someone who is visibly as out here in the desert as a leader, like what how do we sustain ourselves, you know? They say the love will sustain the body, but sometimes it's still exhausting, but also like I can't do anything else. Like I can't stop doing this kind of work. I just don't know what else to do.
I want to say I really admire Michelle's organizing, arts organizing. It's you know, I love organizing that reaches diverse groups of people, but it has a very still Filipinx flavor to it.
Right.
So doesn't get whitewashed, doesn't get whatever washed. It's still very Filipinx, but it speaks to or it tries to reach. It has like this broad reach, which I think, which is one thing I would have changed if I could go back to the 90s. Yeah.
Thank you.
But I think we did in the 90s. We were still, you know, this sort of pan Asian Pacific Americanness was also part of that. I think one of the things that we're also tapping into is like, you know what, clearly like our relationship to our siblings of color, you know, black communities and Latinx communities is real. And I think you know, we don't even, you know, we gave our proper attention to the indigenous land that we're living on now. But you know what? We don't even talk about indigeneity within our Pinoyness. You know, I think those are the kind of things that still, I mean, actually, you know what? The 90s was big on Alibata and getting all the things written up and Babaylan, you know, so like, you know, where are we in 2020 when we, you know, can we resurface that? I mean, are these things that, you know, that we can, you know, build a strong, you know, I think we get lost in those kind of translations, right? We get lost because, you know, because our you know folks in the United States don't remember that we're colonial. You know, we're colonial subjects. You know, like you know, there's this level of stigma related to being colonial, right? Of being subjugated or being part of an empire. You know that you're just, you know, again, like these migrations of labor, for instance. You know, where do we, you know, find that? There's a great question here from Christine Smith and Cheryl. I totally give you props for your Cheryl. Says the dream is again to see a revival, renaissance, and resurgence of art, and I love that. I think that sort of explains that. Christine Smith has a question for Tala. I grew up in Epsaba. What is your advice to Philams? This may be related to what I'm talking about. Who grew up without a large Filipino community, feeling like your mixed identity experience is valid to be shared. I love the idea of Kitakits community to just get started. I know you want to go back to that.
Yeah. So Kita Kits was from a very small kind of. Okay, this is how that happened with Kita Kits, and this is the more practical kind of organizing. It was between Irene and I, who would always run into each other in this big landscape called Los Angeles, and we would, you know, I would see her on the bus stop in a corner. I would say hi, or I would see her in like a film event that she's curating. And every time we talk, every time we see each other, we would find ways of like, you know, talking about creating artwork that speaks to us, or like creating shows that speak to us, like doing a show about Filipino time. And then it's like the craziness of like, how do we manage to do that? I said, well, they all can come whenever they want. And then, you know, so, you know, it's continuing that kind of funny conversations that we have. And then what born out of that was having coffee, talking, And then Kita Kits came out. And it was started out with just the two of us. And she was already living in like Woodland Hills and I'm in downtown LA. And that's kind of like, you know, that's countries apart in LA. That's a long distance to try to meet up and talk. But there was a sense of, I don't even know, there was a sense of urgency. But then there was also a sense of camaraderie because we both understood, you know, what we wanted and what we wanted to see. And how do we expand from that? And how do we involve other people that's just not Filipino either, right? So in every kind of discussion that we had, we tried to include, you know, mixed Filipino kids, you know, anything, anybody that we can kind of become part of an ally, you know, to the point that we had like Cirillo doing an event at Cirillo's house. Cirillo thought that it was only gonna be 5 people. I mean, there were 20 of us that brought food and brought stories. And not only that, somebody out of the blue just performed. It was amazing. And it was often point in perspective where you could be yourself. You could just say your truth and you could just speak about what you're working in. And there was a lot of support. Really, there was a lot of community support. And from that, which Irene and I didn't track, there were a lot of collaborations that were going on. Kids were really starting to do, you know, to kind of take their position and their truths, collaborating with each other and doing something about it and bringing it out into the community, into their community, not necessarily the Filipino community, but into their community, which, you know, refers back to that little group, that kind of inception of just kind of happenstance most of the time. And I think that, you know, don't forget about those happenstance. Don't forget about those moments when all these possibilities can exist. And it's just a matter of thinking about it and continuing to engage and continuing to have conversations and relationships and be critical about what it is that you're trying to put out. Because yes, it's fine for us to be making landscape paintings, but that's not the real shit. You know, the real shit is like, you know, well, you know, what do we do behind closed doors? Girl, we chismis. That's what we do, right? And even that kind of information carries with it so much weight because so much, you know, so much idea and so much can manifest just from those conversations. I mean, how are we gonna do a show about Filipino time? We still don't know, but we're gonna try to figure it out.
I love that. You know what? You know what Cheryl even asked? She was like, well, I loved each and every Kid to Kids events gatherings. Will we see more of them? So I'm asking, will we see more of them?
Irene, you have to answer that one.
Well, definitely not during the pandemic. Let's revisit when the insanity has left us.
I mean, I'm meetings in the parks, for instance. I mean, they're just like, you were just hanging out, you know, like I know we missed that. That's part of what, you know, Michelle, right?
Mhm.
You can say
So
Yeah.
don't forget about your event, Edwin. Kia, La Beja.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's always like, and I think that's one of the things about it. LA has provided that, you know, like this sort of, you know, metropolitan thing. And, you know, growing up here in the desert, it was like that, Michelle, right? Jen.
Yeah.
We were like, in Mount Freddy, we were like, ooh, LA. But you know what? This is the whole thing. Mount Freddy introduced me to Los Angeles of the late 80s, early 90s. And it was Echo Park, the Rampart District, you know, like pre-internet of obviously and pre-Jollibee. So like, but it was during Tommy's Burgers, obviously. So like, there's this whole thing about, you know what? Yeah, I mean, we could talk about that bohemianness, you know, of like what LA represented to folks who were living in the suburbs, if you will. And you know, I always ask that, I'm like, what is Palm Springs a suburb of? And then someone said Riverside. I'm like, okay. And then someone said San Bernardino. I'm like, okay. Then you look at your postmark and it says San Bernardino. You know, it's the weirdest relationship. We're in another county and we are a suburb of San Bernardino. So it's kind of a weird. It's weird because I don't even think of it that way. I really think of this greater LA thing that you know, and I think that's what we're doing. You know, when we think of greater LA, we also think of this sort of greater SoCal. You know, we were able to talk about Irvine here in this conversation. We were talking about also Northern California. We haven't really you know tapped into everything, but Riverside and San Bernardino, the Inland Empire is huge. And you know, Napoleon, you live in the Inland Empire too, technically. You know, since you're Claremont, Pomona, you know, sort of like right on the outskirts. My thing about it is that I think you know, as we do this, and I'd love to see how Michelle, you know, Jen, you please tap into this. We really do see this, and you know, Irene, we got the Tresmaric thing to co-host this, but you know what, we could continue this, you know, and I think maybe that's what the Filipino time thing is about. We were laughingly talking about this. Zach, you're listening, right? Christine, you're listening. Christine, you're listening. Kat, Al, who's GS by the way? Cheryl. Cheryl, two Cheryls. I mean, listen up. We were talking about doing these processes of these meetings over a 24-hour period. Think about it. All of us here
Yeah,
took a half hour, an hour, and did a program just on your own. Do it in whatever you know format you
24
want.
hours.
Can you imagine the kind of impact that would be if a 24-hour Pinoy like extravaganza, if you will? But you know what? That's just a reminder of like you know that again that everydayness of what we should be celebrating. It's not just about the proclamation. You know, it is about our ancestors. It is about looking at those who came before us. But you know what? We got a lot of folks who are waiting for us, to be honest. And we
Yeah.
all you know we Jenny and I we're talking about we're talking about 5 generations here in the desert, and like no, there's no written history. So those kind of things are huge. We've got a lot of work, Manfredi, right? We got to be able to talk to our moms, your mom, Auntie Rosie, you know, the wife of Uncle Benny. You know, can we talk about Hawaii? You know, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be like documented. I think the work that Puro Arte has done, that you know that FPAC has been doing and continues to do. We've got archives, and I know USC. I think folks know that USC has has a large like Filipino American archive. We also have our colleagues who are the Filipino American Library Project PAL. There's a lot of the Philippine film directory, which is actually based in the Midwest, right? So there's a film artist directory. So there's a lot of stuff. You know, when we could talk about LA in this reality and how it's had an impact, you know, this is clear. We've got a lot of work ahead, right, Michelle? To
Yes,
stop.
yeah. Yeah, I have something after this as well. But just hearing the rich, complex history of like Filipinx arts and activism, there's this kind of intimacy. There's this
Mhm.
intimacy, there's this familiarity of the spaces that we call home and the spaces where we feel like it's home. And you know, I really admire our panelists today when you speak of, you know, if there is no space there for you in this mainstream culture, you need to make that space. Make it, you know, make that space for you and your community and take up all the space that you need. That's what I learned. And that's what I continue to learn from y'all, from
And
all of
we
you.
envisioning even with Hit to Kits even before, you know, we talked about this idea, and even with our friends like PJ Policarpio, you know, and Jenilyn Tamulad.
Malad.
Malad.
Come on.
You know, we would talk about this idea far, this Filipino artist retreat, like literally, you know, let's
Right.
do it. You know, we could do it on this. You know, we might not be able to do the kid to kids like intimacy, but we could do this. We could do this Zoom sort of like Filipino artist retreat so that we can, you know, help usher in the next things. Right? Let's do it, Tres Mariques and Pura Arte. Like this is there's a lot of work ahead, and I think that's it's gonna be next. Cheryl's clapping, so I'm glad. But we're gonna need folks like Zach, who's in Hawaii, Manila, Hawaii, and we're gonna need Al. You're in Houston, and whoever else is on this call. We had the New Yorkers in the call, but we definitely have. We've got Nika Aquino too. We've got Jennifer Frias. There's a whole bunch of curators and artists and writers who are out there who are doing some great work that we need to just like, you know, either hub virtually, but like bring into this whole concept of a Filipino artist retreat, because we need to be able to sustain ourselves. Any other remarks? We're at 4:06, so I don't want to keep talking. Yeah, go ahead, Irene.
I just have a note for Christine Smith. You know, you're asking like, you know, you're in an area without a huge Filipino community. I mean, you know, we are now in the internet age. So I suggest like a really practical way to find people is to start a project. And I don't know like what if you're a practicing artist. So I'm just as an example, if like you're a writer, I would suggest maybe starting or creating a zine and asking for contributions from people in your surrounding area, and not necessarily where you're from, but maybe where is Hepzibah?
Georgia.
Okay, so you know, like maybe you know, putting it out on the internet, looking for works from Filipinx or mixed race Filipinx from the South. You know, stuff like that. Like start a project, get people together, and you know, it doesn't have to be like majorly like, you know, random house type publication, but just get it started, you know.
Also, if I may add, for that practical purposes as well, you know, college friends, reach out to them because they may know somebody. That's the most kind of, you know, simple way to do it, is to look at all the people in your network and start spreading it out there, because just by that act alone, looking for Filipino artists is an act of activism, because you're actually trying to create space. You're letting people know that you're making space and you're calling it into being. You're manifesting it. That's as practical as you can get. And that's as easy as you can get to get yourself out there.
Oh, and just putting my
Go ahead, Irene. Sorry.
just putting my money in my putting people's money in my mouth. I would be willing to help if you want to like put out a project. Like we can walk through like how to make that happen. So just contact me. I'll put my email address on the chat.
I want to extend that too to Al, to Christine, to whomever else is on here. I think it's really important. I think this is where our networking. Let's build that network. Let's keep, you know, building that net. You know, it's I think and of course also the bridge to the mother country as well. So and let's see what else is there. Yeah, there we go. Irene put the email for the tresmarix@gmail.com. You could follow Bayanihan Desert at Bayanihan Desert on IG and also on Facebook. I want to give us our, you know, proper plug. Anything else for Tres Marix and Porate? Do we want to plug anything else? FPAC? Oh, FPAC is going on until today.
Right.
Irene put in the chat as well.
So Tala and I and a filmmaker from the Philippines, Ara Chaudhry, who's currently in the US, we put together 6 films, and it's free, and they're amazing. So, and it's on demand, so you can watch it anytime from now till November 1st. And to get to that page, just go to bit.ly/Tresmarix, TRESMARIX. It'll get you to that page, and then the movies are there, and you can just click and watch. It's through Vimeo. And have fun and give us feedback. Thank you.
Well,
Feedback's important.
I want to thank our wonderful virtual town hall panelists, Irene Soriano Saxon, Napoleon Lustre, and Tala Mateo. Thank you, Michelle Castillo and Jenny Liza Ramora and my niece. We are Bayanihan Desert. Manfredi Agriam, we are Bayanihan Desert. We want to thank you all for joining us today. We're actually going to stop recording, and we're going to do more of a social thing too right after this. So if you want to hang out for another 10, 15 minutes, you're all welcome to join us. It's great to see Jake Williams on there, Christine Smith, Bonnie Parker. Who is GS? I'm wondering who GS is. So
That's Garpo. He's a Kita Kids.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we weren't getting trolled by Mike Pence. Zach Mark is in the house, Cheryl Diptowitz Diaz, Aguilar. I really want to thank you all for being part of this. And also the folks who jumped off after earlier. We did have a whole bunch of folks from Archipelago Online. And actually, Irene, that's one of the things I want to talk about. We talked about the level of like using universities to our advantage. And this is actually a good tip for Al and Christine and whomever else wants to do programming. A lot of the stuff that Archipelago and also that you were doing too now is to do these partnerships with universities, and they provide a lot of the resources, be it like money and venue. So like use them because they want to help us. So and they might not ask, but you just propose it and you'll get it done because you'll get some money out of it. All right, we're gonna stop recording and go
All
on.
right. The only way I can stop recording is if everybody logs off, and then it will save on my computer, and then everybody just log back on the link. But
Yeah,
I will
well,
probably go and make one of you a host.
and
Yeah.
Michelle, good luck with Kasama today. Thank you for
Thanks.
and we'll talk to you about that too. Thank you, and we'll see you in
Okay.
a minute if you want to come back.
All
Thank
right.
you.
So we'll log out, log back in. Okay.